Hello, and welcome back to Theatre Macabre. It's been a while, summer break and all that stuff, but we are back. I am back, but I say we, because I'm here. I'm not alone. I've got Fiona. I've wrangled her back in.
Exactly. I'm here.
Because there's more stuff. There's more stuff that I need you for in the guise of Warhammer the Old World role-playing game. After we'd done a very extensive deep dive into the player's guide, I was then given access at the beginning of August, late July, and you can see it's a bit late getting there, but the Game Master's Guide for the same game. And it's an interesting book, and we're going to talk a bit about it. But before we do that, just remind us, Fiona, who you are. Who are you? What do you do?
Who am I? The horrors persist, and so do I, friends. Hello, my name is Fiona. I use she, her pronouns. I am a white woman, just to visually describe a white woman wearing a pink top and hair done up because, it's all messy, so you guys don't need to see that. But I am one half of the DM's book club, which wonderful Hamilton here is also on. I'm also the co-host. Yes, we've got look at the mug.
Merch.
Look at that branding, the merch that only you and I have.
You can turn that for the GM's book club, depending on your
GMs, depending on what you want to do. Yes, I also host the What Am I Rolling podcast, which is like a twice monthly RPG one-shot podcast where we do lots of different systems and interviews with game designers. I'm also 1/3 of the RP Geeks, which is a nerdy TTRPG. Basically, I just do a lot of TTRPG stuff on the internet. CV is so long, you don't need to listen to it. But the main thing is that I read a lot of games, and I like going through them and going like, would I play this game for content or for home? And what is it about these games that we can learn from and make it easier? Because sometimes, like a book like this, like Warhammer, is a topic obviously I don't know much about, but you know a lot about. But then, am I able to understand it, run it, anything like that? Because if it's something that interests me, I'd like to be able to know how we can get that information to all sorts of people who maybe aren't au fait with the original stuff. So yeah, that's why I'm here.
That is definitely why you're here. I've wrangled you in for your expertise in that manner. If there is no one I know who knows more about tabletop role-playing games and has played as many tabletop role-playing games as yourself.
Well, that is very kind. There is loads of people out there. However, they're the ones who they start their bio by going like, I remember playing RPGs in the 70s. And I'm there going like, yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I know a few people, but I think you definitely know you're in the top. You're like in the bell curve. You're over the bell curve and in the way down, on the I know more than the know less sort of thing. So
that's very kind of you. Yes. So well, hopefully I'll have some knowledge to impart today. Whether it's correct or not, remains to be seen. But I'm ready. I'm ready to deep dive into it. So.
Cool. Well, so this is where we are. We are back looking at the old world, as you said, and looking at the GM's guide. I think before we get into it, I think both of us have had a very similar thinking behind this, which you put much more eloquently than I did, about the fact that this is possibly, it's kind of, as someone who's writing games, it's very difficult to figure out who wants what information sometimes, because it's very much easy as both a GM and a writer of games to feel like everyone needs all the information, and sometimes also like, I need to keep those secrets, and finding what things people need and what needs to be kept behind closed doors is difficult, particularly when you're doing a new game and you're trying to make a book, maybe at least one book in the sense of the player's handbook, where all the rules are there for someone to go out and play the game, but you've got all this extra material that you think will be useful for that person on the other side of the desk. And coming from Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, where it has a singular book which has everything in it, and it is a chunky 340-page book.
It's been used as a murder weapon, I'm sure.
Exactly. But it's great that you just have one tome, and it delivers all the necessary information that you need.
Yes.
Because technically, there aren't any monsters in the player's handbook, and so player's guide. So if you did want to go out and play games, you will fall down pretty short of the fact that all you can do is a bit of PvP.
That's really interesting that you say that. I hadn't really noticed that with the player's guide, that there wasn't monster stats. I appreciate it's been a little while since I've actually looked at it, but I think that's really interesting, because obviously a lot of books that we look at do have like basic stats. I'm thinking of D&D at this point. They have like bat, cat, dog, etc. But also then, I guess those are the ones that come to mind. But you're right, like, because obviously Warhammer itself, naturally at the forefront of my mind, just again from a very stereotypical overview of it, it's like, well, there's fighting in it.
Yeah.
So you kind of need that. And what's interesting, I think, where I'm coming from to talk about this today is that the GM's guide is it something that I'm always like, do we need one big book, or do we need to split it into like, here's the player stuff that only the player needs to know, here's all the stuff that the GM needs to know, have a bestiary, have a setting guide. Is it better to split everything out, all that information, so it's more easily accessible, especially if you've got physical books and you're handing them around the table, or do you need it all in one, or are we privileged enough to have all in one PDF or several?
Yeah.
I don't know how difficult that is, because as someone who hasn't created a game, I keep saying that, and how do we organize that information?
Yeah.
I think what's interesting about this, after we've read the player's guide, which is very big, and obviously we did a lot of information about it. We went through it for over a couple of hours. Here, this is under 200 pages, this GM's guide, and I feel that the stuff in it, there's some interesting stuff that is important for GMs, but also I'm just there going like, but this could also be in a setting guide, or this could be in the player's guide. I'm like, why have they chosen this information to be in the GM's guide?
I think that's the thing, and I think it probably is just going on my own experience, is that it was too big for one book and not big enough for three, and that's kind of what I feel like it was. And I think that because 100 of those 185 pages, pretty give or take, we're talking about, it's 89, page 89 to 185 is pretty much the monster manual.
Yes, their version of the bestiary.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
So then you're talking really 88 pages, which technically could all have gone in one book, and then they could have had a monster manual separately, potentially, or I think, I was looking back through the player's guide and thinking like, well, you could swap out like the Pantheon stuff, because really there's not a lot you gain at level 1 having played the game now, which will be on this channel, and taking being a priest of More and realizing that you gain a little extra stuff, but they haven't really pressured enough on the clerical stuff. It's kind of halfway there, so I think they could have made that probably 1 page or 2 pages of A4 with the sort of mechanics of each of the gods, and then really gone into the depth and the lore of them in the GM's guide, for example. And maybe I think, but it's kind of, I think it's well split in the best way they possibly could. I think it's a bit weird that you get the contacts in the player's guide, like it says we had all these contacts, and I was like, who is Ambrosia Waxwing? I don't know, and it's in here. It makes sense.
Well. It makes sense to have these contacts. I know we'll go into them in a bit more depth, because obviously they have stuff that GM should know, but the players don't know.
Yeah.
But maybe, I don't know. Again, me thinking about it is like, well, maybe we could have a little bio of each of what the players are. Like, again, that sort of weird primer about this is what you know just from meeting them, and then in the GM's guide, I said, here's all their secrets. Yeah. I think, but let's start with a big overview of this thing, right? So I'm just going off the content page as well. So in the version that we have, we double checked this time, we make sure we got on the right version, the most latest version. There are 7 chapters. We have the introduction, which is almost like a setting kind of chapter, and it talks a little bit about the grim portents that are deliberately linked into this Talagaad place where it's trying to set all of your adventures in the old world. We then have what we just talked about, these contacts, which I'd love to talk more about, these 20 contacts that are related to the setting, but you could use pretty much in any sort of city that you're using in the old world. Then you have the sort of chapter 3, being the game master, general sort of advice on how to run a game, which again, I'd love to talk more about in general. Then you have chapter 4, events in Talagaad, great big table, random table, I love him. Talking about the corruption element of it, which I think is really interesting, again, for someone who's not au fait with Warhammer, but obviously knows a little bit about, I know corruption is bad, obviously, but I like the paths of corruption.
Yeah, they're good.
Then we have chapter 6, which is magical items, again, very typical to have in the GM's guide. Yeah. And then, as you said, right at the end, chapter 7, allies and antagonists, which is a different way of saying like monsters. So I kind of like that. So you could use these, again, just from that language, you say, okay, these could be friends that fight alongside you.
100%.
Or, so I think just that little bit of language just changes everything.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good terminology, and I might nick it. So I'm like, because I'm always like creatures, I'm always like, they're not all monsters, they're definitely not all monsters. Creatures just also just feels very bestial, and so allies and antagonists is a good terminology.
I think antagonist is I like that as well. Where do you want to start, or is there anything on the overview you want to chat more about?
I think we could run through chapter by chapter, but I think we can be a little bit more high level on some and a bit more in depth on others, because I think
Feel so.
Yeah. So if we start at, there's a nice little like intro with these letters, which are quite remind me a little bit of the sort of notes you got at the beginning of Woofrup, which were quite good.
Yes. Yes.
And then it tries to give you a little idea of what we've just sort of overlaid, like what this book does. It's got a toolbox of things. It's got some rules that are specific for you, like downtime, corruption, and magic items, and then talks about the allies and antagonists and how that is. Talagaad itself, I think, is a well-rounded, put together place with some nice, interesting little tidbits of locations and stuff like that, and feels real enough.
Yeah,
real enough. And I think, which is always the case with any sort of like really good city in Warhammer. It's got a real good mix of the sort of the profound and profane together, which is, it tells you of like, you've got this, the Duke that runs the whole wider Talagaad. You've then got I forget the name of the not the Marquis, what they're called, the person who runs it now. I'm trying to scroll down.
The magistrate?
Magistrate, that's the one I'm looking for, yes.
Oh, the Anselm Ragus.
Yes, that's
I want to say their name is. Yeah.
I've lost them in my thing. Oh, yeah.
Page 9.
There it is, yeah. And the fourth son of a noble, with and it's kind of got little... I liked the sort of classic Dickensian naming that you have in this as well.
Yeah.
My favourite is like the Talagaad Watch, for example, are called the Talagaad 11th, which is the state troopers, are known as the Gnarl Rotters.
Gnarl Rotters, yeah,
is a great
absolutely.
Name. And they were rushed to town to restore if the group of dignitaries from the Duchy of Osterland were assassinated. It's kind of like little things that give you little insights into them. And I enjoyed it. Is there anything particular from it that you enjoyed? I like Gnarl Rotters. Is really I wanted to get in there.
You just must tick that off the list of us talking. Yeah. So overall, this particular bit, if we're just talking about the primer itself before going on to the Grim Portents, this is only about 7 pages. Yeah. Right, so not a lot of space to get things across, but I think it does such a good job of just like going, hey, here's the outline of stuff that's interesting. Here's a couple of locations. Here's a lot more NPCs that are named to have their own separate bits, which I thought was really interesting, which I'll go into in a second. But it feels like there was enough for you to go like, oh well, I can add something here. You've got the general sort of districts and whatnot, because that's sometimes the problem. The problem I have with fantasy towns, is like, I'm thinking of, for example, and I always do this, I refer back to D&D, I'm thinking of Waterdeep. There are so many districts. You've done Dragon Heist. There's so many districts, and they're all different, but everyone's got a tavern and all these NPCs, and it's just like, again, you go from the big grand stuff down to the little granular detail, and you're just going like, how am I going to remember these things? What I think, again, going back to the organization of information, it's like, okay, here's like administration, what you need to know, the Iron Duke, done, great. Yeah. Then you've got like crime and law, okay, here's some information here, and then like docs, and then it's like, okay, here's a faction, here's a place, but then here are people, and these people aren't necessarily connected to places. I've never experienced a book, and again, this might be just my ignorance on this, where it's the NPC has its own name as a heading, rather than like, here at the Yawning Portal, 3 people. It's like, these people are before the location. You see what I mean?
Yeah, I guess, I don't know. And the way I've sort of outlined what I'm doing in my book, and it's something that I've seen in other books when I was looking for references on how to lay out cities, was just doing a section called People. And that's how I've done it. Sometimes they will come up in it, like, for example, the Roaring Badger's proprietor is named there, Vartola Skint. But sometimes I'll just be like, I did like a couple where it's just like, oh, this is just, there's an old warrior who's always just hanging around the city, and you can kind of catch him, and I kind of like, and that feels, and I feel vindicated in things like the Lingering Stench, who's really cool, and it's such a like wild idea of a beast man that's wearing the skin of a human to like hide away.
Horrific, let me tell you.
But great, totally Warhammer. But you're right. They're just there, aren't they? Just stuck in. Like, here's a whole section about this one person.
And I think what's interesting then, it then makes you the GM portray these NPCs. When you imagine players, they go like, "Oh, we want to go shopping. Is there a blacksmith's?"
Yeah.
And normally you go, "Oh yeah, it's like the rusty iron."
Yeah.
And you go there, and it's just an exchange of goods.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily meet the people. And often, again, we always joke about this. You meet the NPC shopkeeper, and you just want to keep talking to them because they're weird and different because they're impromptu. Here, it's like, here's the person who is connected to something. So, for example, let me see, let's say I'm just trying to think. Dr. Jasper Rem, for example, he's the medicine man. He it has an apothecary shop called the Merry Thistle, which is again some great names here. But you're like, who? Oh, I need to go to apothecary. Well, we've got the name. We've got a person. His hands and arms are covered in old burn scars caused by an elixir formula exploding due to his inattention. Though he certainly doesn't recount the story in that way. So again, that's a lot in there. Like you describe, he's got the burns and arms, but he's like, maybe Mad Professor style.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, there's nothing. I've got 9 other fingers. That sort of vibe from there, right? So it's putting that person first rather than the place. And I just think that's such a small thing, but instantly I'm like, oh, here's 5 people, and I can see them very differently. And they're written, again, they're not like, here's their personality, here's their flaw, here's some catchphrases like we've seen in other books.
Yeah.
So instantly I'm like, oh, that's really interesting that they're put to the forefront rather than hidden in a location.
Prosaic rather than being like, here's a set of defined characteristics like in a format, which is something that I vibe much more with, because you're like, you get the idea of like, simply by he spends most of his days either under the effects of one of his tonics or by telling self-pitying stories about how his long gone glory days in Altdorf. And you're just like, well, that's given me in that sentence just a whole, even though I might interpret that differently to anyone else, it still gives me a character in my mind. And that's always such a better thing for building a character.
But instantly I can see, like, if they're trying to get some information, it feels very much like that this guy is the old boy, oh, remember this and this, and then okay, you need to do a test in order to get past, and be like, cut to the point, he goes, oh, don't mess around,
but also always
chum,
half cut, he's always slightly half cut on his own tonics, exactly.
Like another one again, and they're also interesting as well. So the and I appreciate all my pronunciations are going to be out the window, but the Marion Lugin, who is a barrel maker. And this idea that the wine that they create, these are excellent vessels. They provide most of her income. She's a master box maker as well, and she makes beautiful wooden boxes that have hidden compartments, cunning clasps, and something of a fad amongst local nobility. Again, do you need to? Would you go? We need someone that makes a good box. Why would you go to this person? Maybe it's part of the quest. Whereas here, it's like you meet this person, and maybe they need you to take something that, I don't know, I just thought, what an interesting choice. There's some interesting jobs here. There's some interesting NPCs, and it's because they've been put to the forefront and not buried in locations. I say that there are locations obviously in there. It's not just fully NPCs, but it feels like there's more NPCs than locations.
Equally as much as well.
Or equally, yes, agreed.
And you're probably right, there are more, because each location generally has someone to go with it, so there probably are more. And you're right, it's so much more. It makes it so much more alive, the people, than the places, and it's the things, because every city, ostensibly at the end of the day in a fantasy realm, unless you've got something particular about it, is always going to generally have some sort of magistrate or ruler. It's going to have some form of court, some sort of jail, some sort of tavern, some sort of docks, some sort of thieves guild, and those kind of things. But what makes them more intriguing is sort of the little funny, interesting bits you've made about them, and the people that are part of them, and what makes them tick to a certain extent. And it's the things that make them different. And so I think focusing on the people is a really interesting way of doing it. It makes me want to write more people for my book, because I'm like, it's really good, right?
I think there's a lot of worth and a lot of you get a lot of value out of having supplements that talk about NPCs. I know we've talked about this. I'm going to say this wrong. That was 100 Faces of Sigil that we were going to look at. The NPCs. What I mean?
In the cage, Faces of Sigil. The Faces of Sigil.
But there was, there are always NPCs in there. But flicking over slightly, because you mentioned one of those sort of little story hooks, the idea of this beast man that's in human skin. So what I find interesting, again, so there's these blue boxes. Or sometimes a white box as well, which gives like current events or what's happening or a story hook, and they're not all in one place, they're throughout. And normally I don't like that because I'm just there going like, well, I need to, like I want to, I need it all in sections. But actually, because this is such a short section and to the point, this is actually like, oh, we just talked about this thing. Well, guess what? Precious cargo. So there's a barge that has now like run aground, and now there's a standoff, and literally it's talking about the people, because you just talked about trade and like people looking on boats and stuff like that. The let me find that the lingering stench person is talking about the roaring badgers guest of this horrible, disgusting man, which again feels very real. Don't get me wrong. We've all been in these pubs where we go, don't sit next to this guy. But again, it's not like fully fledged out as a plot hook. But I love this idea that, oh yeah, you go to this place, you're talking to Valtos Skint, and you're like, what is that smell? And you see this guy in the corner, and you're like, well, that's something for you to investigate later. So again, it's just a sprinkling of plot hooks that are maybe NPC focused, or just things that you could be like, this is happening at the same time, if your players aren't following the grim portents that it suggests. Like my favorite one is this white box one that's on the same page as the lingering stench one, called A Voice to Obey, where it's 3 soldiers have been found drowned one night after another, their bodies tangled in the nets of fishermen folk. And what it is that there's a young woman who is cursed by a witch for the first words of the first words she speaks to any living soul compel those to hear them to obey. And she's seeking to test these limits by ordering these sailors into the waters, which is really interesting, right? Because that's something I wouldn't have necessarily thought of, and that's a little interesting mystery. Because obviously, like, oh, it must be a murder of some sort, but then it's like this woman using her power and testing it out, and like where does that go from there? Exactly. I instantly see that as a starter adventure. I just thought that was just really interesting.
Those are useful, and I've done put them because I think they're really good. Like, just mysteries as a general theme are just always great, because like quest and it's just that already starts your mind on like, well, not only have you got the whole, like, oh, I could use this to make a little mystery for my characters to try and unravel, which then could lead me to this witch, which could then, in theory, link to maybe my Grim Portent, or it could be one of the threads as well. But even just without that, it's just a way to get them in the woods where I can then lead them to something else, or it could then be this witch could be a valuable NPC that could be really useful way for me to gift my players trinkets and useful magical things, or something like that, or something it's just a nugget of useful stuff that requires less of the GM of their work. That's what it is. I think this primer, if you weren't sure, and I don't know, you might be able to tell me if there's going to be a starter set for the old world or anything like that. Yes, there is. Yes.
But so again, just looking at this, I'm like, oh, I don't need the starter set necessarily. I kind of can take something from here and make it my own. And like I said, all the information is very streamlined. There's enough for you to be like, I can build off this. And I actually, reading it, I was like, oh, actually, this is not what I expected. Like, it is still, for me, a typical sort of fantasy town. But there's interesting names, interesting NPCs. And instead I'm like, oh, well, yeah, I could pick that. I feel confident enough once I know the system from looking at the player's guide or having the reference sheets to be like, okay, let's pick this one. And go from there. I don't need to prep loads for it, which 100%. I think is always good for a GM who's trying out a new system.
Exactly, and I imagine this will only lead to further locations coming in the future with similar vibes, which I think is great. And I think also, just to finish on it being shorter, is that actually you just don't get fuddled with like endless things. Like, we did Thay recently as a look into this Thay book that was done for D&D, and after a while you were just like, I am on the 50 billionth name by now, and I'm just slowly losing the will. Whilst this is actually quick, snappy, straight to the point with the fun information, and you're on, and you don't get bored. I'd say as well, which is quite good.
Agreed. You it's very little can go wrong with this, that sort of thing. My only criticism, as always, is that there's no I can't even say the word. There's no pronunciation guide. Yes. And again, I know, but it's just that little thing, because I'm so bad at pronouncing names anyway. I can't even get through a whole sentence just now. Just even if it's just of the locations, like the Flusserdrek, for example.
I was Flusserdrek. I'm like, is it?
There you go.
Yeah, but I'm still with you. I was like looking at that word for a long time, like Flustruck Flask, because it's meant to be Germanic as well. So is it Flustrek?
Right.
Or is it like, so it would be, I agree. Yeah,
I mean, you know, one
more
of
of
those things.
those.
I, again, if you're, I wonder what would be useful. Again, thinking about the sustainability of such a big, like, yeah, you could have it written in text, but maybe if you have the game designers being recorded like as a little video, like
Yeah.
how to Talagaad is like, hey, places we'll talk about, and they're like, oh, my favorite place is this Flustrek,
Yeah.
pronounce this, but you know, just having the game designers do it. And again, I know
Exactly.
that that person's pronunciation doesn't mean it has to be yours, but like because Keith Baker of Eberron said the same thing about
Yeah.
Siri or Sire or whatever
Yes.
when we did Eberron. But I think it's just nice to have it as a resource of hearing people pronounce things, because then you're like, oh great, rather than you just guessing and hoping for the best, you know.
Yeah, 100%. I totally agree, and it's a minor thing. However, it also takes a long time. So yes, sometimes it's just like, does it matter? You just say it how you want to say. So
I know,
there's
but
that.
I always forget to commit halfway through, and then I panic.
Yeah,
And
and I
it's,
also think it's more of an issue for people like us who talk about these things online, where we feel much more like it's out there, and us saying like Hermione is a big deal. Whilst if you're
oh
just at
yes,
home and you're talking to some friends, or you're playing around a table and you saying Flusser direct, and it doesn't matter, no one's going to question you, but everyone
yeah,
else can read the book. So
for sure,
there
for
is
sure,
that.
for sure.
I think we can skip over the particularities of these Grim Portents, but it does give you
Yeah,
some, because I think that would be slightly on the spoiler side. But
for sure.
just to clarify that it gives three different Grim Portents, which, if you recall from us talking, the Player's Handbook, is this sort of deeper, darker menace that is hidden behind whatever campaign you might be playing. And with it, it normally starts with an introductory, like an inciting incident, if we're going to use the terminology from books, and then leads to a further plot thickening, so you might have an inciting incident where you come across something that you shouldn't have, or you're just in the wrong place at the wrong time, or you just see something, or overhear something, or find something, or are put in the way of something on purpose, that then leads you to be under the gaze of maybe something you shouldn't be, or maybe leads you to something that you just can't keep your mind off, and that leads you to these thicker plots which you can then build on, which is really cool, because it then takes, because these ones are particular to Talagaad, it gives you little areas to like, oh, this means this relates to this person that we talk on page X, or this relates to this location which is here. And then, like, I love these ideas of the grim reminders,
Yeah.
which are always particular to each one, that sort of are things that will reminisce the grimness that you once witnessed, or is stalking you, or is there always it's just that kind of idea that every time, okay, here we go, I was in a building the other day and I went into the basement and it just stank of my school. Do you know what I mean? It had that
Oh,
smell
right.
of my
Yes.
school.
Flash
And
memory,
flash
essentially.
memory
Yeah.
of ideas. And it's kind of like that, but with haunting
Like scenic moments,
scenic
essentially.
moments,
Like, yeah, because there's another game I've played and looked at is called Trophy Dark, and they just strip everything out, so it's just, most scenarios are just a page with a table, and it's like this is it. But at the top they have similar things of like grim reminders, or I can't remember what it is in there sort of setting, and it's like, this is a scene that you can set up, like like the crow flies and picks an eyeball out of a
Yeah.
body, and it's something that's just like a significant moment, but it's nothing necessarily related to gameplay, but it just sets the tone, and that's what these grim reminders are. They're like three things that like set the tone, and I really like that. I'm a big fan of that, because then it gives you the GM something to fall back on if you're worried about, like, oh god, I can't think of anything for the scene, and especially like if you need more time, if the players are doing something, you could be like, meanwhile at the back, there's a fire, and then going into the detail of that and just picking up on that. I'd also say I'd welcome another technique I've seen done in other games, is that letting us paint the scene together. So you can pose a question to your players to be like, okay, so you're here at this thing. What is something that reminds you of the Grim Portent, or something like that? It'd obviously be better that you'd word it better than that, but people be like, oh, the smells, and getting them in on it, setting them on the same page, then it connects them to it and engages them with this Grim Portent, because everyone has, I believe, the same Grim Portent, because that's the thing that binds you together, right? So you want to make sure that everyone's on the same page and like make sure they're engaged, because otherwise you don't want one person to be like, oh, I kind of signed up for a jolly jape rather than this like doom and gloom and all that sort of thing. So it's like you said, the inciting incident that connects the players together. And I think, again, not spoiling it, the three that you got there, perfectly acceptable. They work well in Talagaad because of the connections and stuff. And I think there's a lot to it, but also leaves it open ended so that, you know, depending on how successful they are at the beginning of it, it doesn't necessarily impact or like, and it's now closed and you're done, you know. It's sort of like kind of seed into the threads, which we'll come on to in a second, that connect the rest of the world together. Exactly.
I think I've shown the page for the first one, so maybe we could just to mention it very briefly, is that like the only thing I'd say about it is that like I think they're well written. I think the first one, it focuses on a vampire and talks about the characters like entering this bar and having a drunken conversation with someone. The only thing I would say is that you could probably hammer it home a little bit harder, because it feels like the inciting incident sort of happens just because he says, my uncle is dead but rules are still, and you're like, okay, you know, that could just be, that doesn't necessarily mean I've said he's a vampire. Do you know what I mean? Because
he's got his legacy is
exactly, could just
big shoes to fill, you know.
Exactly. Yeah, his legacy rules still. So I don't think that's quite. Yeah, I just feel like it could be laid on a bit thick, but I quite like in that, talking about the grim reminders, it just says that you're always reminded by the crackle of firewood and the smell of burning flesh and the screams of the dying, then come back, and it's kind of like that idea that you might all be sitting around a fire and it's like all nice and cozy, and then suddenly you just might go to your players and just say, suddenly just stare deeply into the flames, and just memories of that night come back to you as the smell of burning flesh hits your nose. You know, it's that kind of thing that just helps the GM just like remind them subtly, even if they've gone astray of their story, or just to keep that sense of tension going throughout the game. You got a job to do. You remember this thing, and it's just little seeds. There's another game a book I've been reading called Making Enemies by Kiefer Mann, and he did something about creating monsters, and in which, like, depending on the theme, that sort of suggestion of like monsters as themes or thematic stuff. So if you wanted to talk about corruption, maybe having some sort of corrupting ooze that sort of burns and stuff like that, and then it's like, oh well, what kind of damage do they do? They do this kind of damage, and it just there's a big table of relating it back to those themes. So again, that's the sort of thing I can imagine with this, is that, okay, you want the Grim Portent, if you're making your own, to be around a certain theme that will connect you to a wider world, okay, and then build from there. Like, you know, vampires, obviously they've got huge, lots of connotations there, but, you know, what if you wanted to do something about, like, just trying to think, like the economy, like tariffs going up or something like that. Okay, maybe there's a heist going on, but there's been Beastman taking it, and then maybe to reveal that they're actually helping people, and going deep into it like that, starting with a theme. And I think each of these themes are really good concepts for any creative endeavor are always really useful, I think, because it's always something for you to go back to, and like we do architecture all the time and building. It's like, what is the design, what's the concept at the heart of it, and even though that might be quite frivolous, it's always at least something that grounds you,
that jumps you off
to the reasoning behind it, and then gives it cohesion. And I totally agree. I think it's, as you said, it's like if you're building factions, for example, it's like you might take the Robin Hood ideal, but then it's like, okay, what's my twist on that? Oh, my twist will be that they're Robin Hood sort of character, like steal from the rich but take from the poor, but at the same time they also are goblins. I don't know, you know, like I can't think of something like that. Or that's not enough. But it's just like, or it's like they steal from the rich but take from the poor, but they also, I can't think of a good one off the top of my head.
I like the fact you got to steal from the rich and take from the poor rather than give to the poor. So it's like reverse Robin Hood is like
take from the rich, take from the rich and take from the poor. That's what they do. They do both.
Win-win for Robin. Absolutely.
So. Sorry, I was thinking you mentioned tariffs, so that made me just think of the rich stealing from the poor. That's probably what it is.
I mean, fair. But yeah, I think, like I said, like the Grim Portents here, you're free. Free is always a good number just to start off, and like, keep it simple. But again, I can imagine in future expansions it goes, here's 5 new Grim Portents that we've come up, and guest writers as well, stuff like that. So I know we're always talking about, like, we'd love to see more homebrew, or home writing on these things, and I think what a perfect way to be like, okay, let's get the inciting incident and getting writers into doing that. So I if people are excited, and again, I say this without knowing anything about licensing and whether or not you can create third-party content. But if you're like, where should I start to create stuff like that? You can't at all. Oh no,
not for Warhammer. No, not for anything Warhammer. No third-party content unless it's for free. Unless it's completely for free.
That's annoying. But we'll tell you what, if you're thinking, I love these Grim Portents, can I put them in a different system where I can sell things?
Exactly.
Try that first, do that first. Yeah. There you go. Whew, saved myself there.
There you go.
Whew, didn't know that, but there we go.
Guest writers is always a way for them to do it licensed, or if they do licensable material, it would be really cool to see those things. So that's the Grim Portents. I think contacts, there's a lot of them. I think
20.
The thing that's quite cool about it is the the overview page I quite like, because it states that you can get these are all the contacts you can find in the player's guide. We rolled for them when we played our game, and you get these little things. We didn't actually use them very much in the game because we only played like 2 parts, but it was kind of nice to have these little things. And I used to debate with Amber Waxwing about things and stuff like that. It was like what my it gave you a little bit of like paragraph of text for each of them in the book, and then in this you get a much more depth thing. But the using, you
get a full page for each of them,
But the using contacts bit is I always quite like, because it's just a reminder as to how you can how these can become useful to you. So like, say someone asks for help, a varied cast, so it just gives them skills and knowledge. But I like it as the ones I was like is it's back on track. So it's a way that you can just use the contacts to just give hints should they become stuck, which I always think is good. It's a route into a story, bring the world to life, recognise ways, grounding characters, vulnerability. But the other thing is like politics. Contacts can also give voice to opinions and views on the old world that the characters might not share. They can express fears of invasion, thoughts of a noble's heir, local gossip, more. Details like these help bring the world to life and can foreshadow events in your campaign. And those are the ones that I was like, they are really always useful for that. Because I always find it's very useful as a GM to have a DM PC for particularly at the beginning, because they're always there as a useful guide to everything that you're trying to create around them, knowing that your players haven't possibly experienced everything in the world, or they know that if you're using Warhammer, they've never played Warhammer before, there's a lot to take in, that it's great to have that DM PC just there to be like, oh, it's the Marienburgers, and they want to go, they've been trying to get independence for a while now, like, oh, there's some lore, exposition conversation. Drop mic, done.
I always used to call my DMPC quest help. Just because for ease. But I think again it just gives you a reminder they're not just like a heal bot, or they're not an extra person. Just they're a person with flaws and like a personality. And I like the idea that they're recognizable, they have a quirk or something, but that they're a real person to talk to. Even if you're a GM that doesn't necessarily do like accents or like role play, you could be like, you could just describe them. You could see this person has a nervous tick whilst they're talking to you, and they say this. Roll for insight or whatever. Okay, you can see that they are definitely afraid. You can use a combination of all these techniques. But I think one of my big praises about this book in general is that all the advice for the GM, which is in chapter 3, but here at the context as well, because context isn't something I always think about, but they're so important for a game like this. We've discussed on GM's book club, like Mothership, and one of the big criticisms we had, and obviously I know this comes from Quinn's Quest as well, is like there's no reason for you to care about the other player. There's no connection to the background other than you are on the same mission, which kind of like sucks, because naturally we want to do in role-playing games, unless you're playing murder hobos who's just like, whatever, I don't care. You care about the other person. You want to have something, even if it's just like, they're my long-lost brother, or I was married to them and now we're getting a divorce. It's just something. The Grim Portents connects your characters together for you now. You can obviously, the circumstance of it. But here, the contacts, you can have something like that. Oh, well, I'm connected to them because I'm indebted to them, or I've done this, And I think there's enough. Again, there's enough detail on them for a page of these 20 contacts, but it's not overloading. No. There's enough intrigue and enough space for you, the GM, to add more stuff. And my big tick on this is there is a. You've already talked about it. This contact archetype table, which splits them. I know you've got to have it on the screen, but I'm going to hold it up for myself as well. Whereby it splits them into like four sections of the great and the good, the comrades in arms, the common folk, and the wanderers and wastrels. What archetype that is in that, the suggested kind of character, and then here's a contact you could use as that archetype on this page. Fantastic! Oh my god, brilliant! You're not having to search through and like what it just gives you all that information in such an easy way.
You want, because it's like, I need a preacher. I can use this one. It's like, it's so good at that time, and it's like, I've just got at least an archetype. I've got an archetypal a character mixed to an archetype that I can then utilize, even to adjust to make them a little different for whatever I'm looking for.
Yeah, these are all, again, starting off points to be like, I'll take this. Oh, but I want to change their name. Oh, I'm going to change their lineage. I'm going to do this. Perfect. Great. And I feel, and it gives advice on, like, how do you role play these characters? And it always comes back to it. They have to be memorable. And I know sometimes we always, as GMs, when we're put on the spot and improvise, they become memorable because it's clear that the GM is like trying to make stuff up. Yeah. But what if it's just something like the contact you have is always calls your character boss. Yeah. It's like, all right, boss, how you doing? And you're like, who's this? And it's like, cheeky chappy. Instantly, you could get a whole world from that. So even if it's just something that's saying that word, a catchphrase just gets you into it. And I just think, some really good advice. We all know
how many, it's just famous within role players, isn't it? That, the random weird chappy that you've made for a momentary, quick off the foot thing becomes, the darling of the players that they are desperate to save in all situations, want to know what they're doing and make sure that, it's like a... it's a thing, isn't it? And I think, and it comes from those. It comes a lot from the GM. I think that's always a good sign of a good GM as well, when they love the NPC. So.
Like the fact that, the big one I always think of is Victor, the black powder merchant from Critical Role.
Sold in grey and white. Yes. Oh, you said you need black powder. Yes, come in.
Very well.
Yeah, you instantly know who I'm talking about. Yeah. It was just clearly, hello. Hello. Yes. You want powder?
He's got one less finger. He's always losing a finger.
But and they go back 3 or 4 times, but you clearly we have, whenever we're shopping, we go back to it. So that's why I think all these characters, again, it breaks it down into what their primary leadership, primary skill is, what favors, needs, their sort of own alliances, and it just gives it so simple. And my favorite bit is gossip. You got to have rumors. Yeah, exactly. I think that's just so good, because then you're like, is this true? Is this not? Or is this a plot hook? Yeah. Great, love that. And then, of course, from that you have gossip, and then you have secret, and it's like, oh, what can that do? And I think there's some cracking secrets in this particular. Do you have a particular favourite contact? I know you talked about one just there.
I did like Ambrosia Waxing because I'm kind of close to them, but they're also they're basically like the GM's GM, because they're the law keeper.
Yes,
which I like. And it's just everything. And she's like, I met with a witch once out by Longford who claimed that she could see the future. Told me all sorts of things about the wickedness that would befall me if I kept asking difficult questions. She told me I'd fall in with a handful of danfolk and wind up down myself in turn. She was drowned for witchcraft that winter in a duck pond by a cottage. If she could see the future, wouldn't she found a drier spot to live? I just think love every second of that sentence, I think it's quite great. The sort of it's kind of got that little hint of humour, and it's got that little hint of just the fact that maybe the witch is taking the mick out of her. It's like, bad will happen to you if you keep asking me hard questions. You're kind of I liked it. And I like that. There's also moving down. It's in the not the great and the good. Oh, there's Amalinda, who looks menacing, which I always thought was cool. A preacher. Yeah, and that she's basically got Dr. Dolittle skills, because the animals always speak to her and stuff like that.
Yeah, you've got a whole range of people. I'll tell you my favourite person. Actually, can you guess? I'll be interested to see if you can guess which one. I know it's hard when there's 20 pages of them.
Who is the most gory? Or is that what is it? It's not. No, it's not Falder, is it? No.
Is that what you're saying?
It's just because they're a heretic, but maybe it's too much. No, I don't know. Is that okay? I was going to go with it. It's probably just going. Is it?
It's not that person. It's Leonard van Olbelman, which has his brother's skull on his hat, who he talks to. Because I think that's absolutely bloody bonkers. And his secret is that sometimes it can be heard murmuring to his brother's skull, and rarely, when he is alone, the Ernest answers. So the skull's called Ernest. I just think it's such it's quite a statement to come in a hat in in general, right? And then it's got your brother's skull on it.
I guess so. So I thought he'd be a bit too like pompous for you to like, but maybe that's kind of, you know what I mean? But maybe that's no, it's fine.
I mean, I don't know. I thought that was
good,
interesting.
It's very cool.
But yeah, I think overall, like again, those were the ones that was standing out to me. I just thought were just really, like again, there's a little bit for something for everyone here. And even if you're not playing the old world, even if you're not playing this system or Warhammer at all, I think taking this sort of structure, I know I keep banging on about structure, but like, okay, you want an NPC, what's their primary skill? Are they a fighter? Are they a spellcaster?
Yeah.
Are they just a social one? Okay, where, what's their motivation? Where would you normally find them? And just having that in a table, boom, done. And if you did 20 contacts, split into that table, you're kind of laughing in a way that you're never going to be out of pocket when someone goes, well, I want to find so and so, and you're like, okay, you need a priest, you need a banker, you need an accountant. Usually it's an accountant, right? Someone with the expenses. All right, I've got something for you. So yeah, and the artwork I think is good as well. Like again, it gives you a quick personality of everyone as well. So I quite like those.
Yeah, no, they are very good. I like the one with the wolf pelt on their head that's like really high. The Ulrich soldier, like dedicated to Ulrich, which is the wolf god, like the war battle god. They look very cool. Some good art there. So that's them. I think as you kind of overviewed them, and they're all really worth like digging into and see what they're all about. They come up in the game, as I said. They come up in when you're doing your character creation as well, so they're always like things.
And again, I just think it's the reason I appreciate we've banged on about it, about NPCs and stuff like that, but I don't know any other game that puts them to the forefront as much detail other than maybe Warhammer books. Because obviously I know Warhammer is about, you've got these stories and you're going to have characters that come back again, but like D&D has like, oh, here's the leader, here's this, but it's not like, I just don't know. I just feel like it's at the front of the book. It's not hidden away.
The best book for it, though, and we did mention it, we kind of belittled it a little bit, but I think, like, in the sense of, like, it had lots of stuff, but I do think that the Dragon Heist book had some of the best NPC sort of information in there, just particularly for, like, because it had all the factions, and that was it was very faction focused, but there was Yagra Halband or something like that. Anyway, who's like a Zentarum, and they had like some really cool like people that had like within the faction. This is the people that you're going to interact with in the faction. This is their attitude, and this is your sort of like connection to these factions. That really gave personality in the same way this is doing to in that game where you're going to be joining a faction that's very fundamental to the process of that storyline, that sort of campaign. This similarly is less focused on what the campaign is, but we've as mentioned the Grim Portents as well. Some of these characters pop up in those as linked to them or to the dark threads later on. So that's kind of so it does kind of have that vibe. Being the game master.
Yes. Yeah. Chapter 3. It's very fundamental things that you pick up as it's very good sort of we said this about was it the new Dungeon Master's Guide as well? I think of just like it's very great fundamental basics of how to run role-playing games in a basic way, but obviously focusing on the eccentricities of, if that's the right term, for this game, in the sense of like how do maps work in this game. It has a particular zoning form the combat has, but you could, if you wanted to, change this up and run it like Warhammer tabletop wargame if you so wished. There's nothing stopping you for that. Or I like the title for this one. I stab him, then I stab him again, then I get my axe. Yes. and yep. I think I thought the writing in this was very good. Yeah. I think the only thing I was missing, and again, I apologize, I can't remember if this was in the player's guide, is that there's no mention of safety tools.
It mentions them here in that one I just literally mentioned, which is, it says...
Oh, in that bit, yes.
It does say, doesn't it? Ask your players if there are any topics they'd like to avoid and invite players to talk to you privately if they wish. You'll find more advice on how to run a great role-playing game for everyone on cubicle7games.com. So okay, links to a website. So, okay, that's good that they had their own resource for it. I agree. But I always think... being considerate of others will only enhance that experience. So when you're role-playing games. So there is, and you're not straying into territory that make players uncomfortable, especially when approaching topics that might reflect real-world events. So there's things like
it's kind of mentioned all but in name, right? I think that's the thing, and
exactly.
I totally understand why they do that, because they don't want to, because there is a lot of like tension and emotional charge in when you say the word safety tools. People like balk at the idea of an X card or the word of it, even though all it is to keep you safe.
Yeah.
But yeah, I haven't looked on Cubicle 7 Games to see what their safety tools or what they recommend is. If they've got something great, if it's just
Really
like, oh, just be nice. Yeah, I mean that's the only thing I'd say. But I think it's good to think about like I don't know about yourself. I tend not to do long campaigns. It is like, maybe 6 sessions at most. Here it's like you gain a lot from doing longer sessions, which is very true. And it's talking about like, how do you do that? How do you come across this? So, you got your spacing, you've got your pacing, sorry, and how do you escalate stuff? The different kinds of campaigns, which I thought was interesting. I'd never seen it defined in such ways, that having this idea of a sandbox one, which we always talk about, like big one is always Curse of Strahd in my head, or a directed one, and like it talks about the benefits and cons of both.
Yeah,
and I just thought that was really interesting. Again, that it's laid out in such a way that you're like, oh, as a GM, like maybe I need to be more obvious if it's a sandbox game, because sometimes players just don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Whereas a directed one, I could be flexible, but be like, hey, don't forget, importance comes here. Like, oh, and things happen because I'm pushing you towards the narrative. So I hadn't seen it defined like that, and defined well, I think.
That's very true. And I think as someone who's not gone, I've ever run a game which has kind of got not been a full sandbox. I've never done that extreme level, because I always find that is something that goes beyond the 1 or 2 year sort of campaign, which is the largest I've ever done is 2 years, and that's just getting through Dragon Heist with a little bit of my own stuff and a little bit of side alley investigations on player focused things, which is definitely what I'd consider is under a directed campaign heading, really, with the little hint of sandbox which would come, I guess. But you played in quite a big, long campaign.
A long time ago for 5th edition, and there was a bit online as well, and that was very good, but that was like, I think, well over 100 sessions. I don't. We talked about this before. Would this game make you'd want to play for 100 sessions? You know what I mean? Like I feel like a good 20, perhaps. Again, I think, to be fair, because obviously what I'm talking about is a D&D where it's like, get to level 20. Where do you go from here? So that's why here, obviously, it's a little bit different.
I think so. I think that it's an interesting one, because I think that we've talked about this, and I haven't talked about like my experience of the game, and I think I really want to possibly get a couple of people from our game to we did a little chat afterwards, but to actually just talk about our experience with the game, because I think that combat is actually really tough. And it's quite brutal, and in the same sense as like the Lord of the Rings game that we've talked about separately on the GM's Book Club, where it's like it has that same vibe as like it's hard work and you're not that great at it, and it's something you kind of want to avoid. That at the end of the day you start thinking, well, what is this game more focused on the role play, because it has heavily pushed on NPCs and the interrelationship with characters, and character creation being this really in-depth, and the grim portent and the narrative that you're playing through, that I possibly see it more as an urban adventure game than I do and the sandbox is probably more GTA or Red Dead Redemption than it is Elden Ring, because it definitely feels like it's pushing you in the direction of like quick, nasty fights in back alleys than grand epic battles in the battlefield, personally, which is kind of weird. And I'd say that if you were, I feel that that's how the system actually felt for me, as something like, when it came to fighting something big and horrible, it was quite hard work, and they don't have a lot of hit points, and we'll come on to the monsters a little bit later, and I'd be terrified to go up against a wyvern, let's just say, because
agreed.
Because like we were fighting something that was like a bestial character, and that was difficult with 6 of us against 1, and you're like, so I feel that your question about would you go on for hundreds of sessions, I'm concerned about the lack of crunch, for one thing, and also, but I think that, but then on the flip side, to coin a phrase, that actually it's just considering this as a very lightweight, rules light, simple combat game, which is more focused on urban exploration and running around in that sort of setting, and possibly heading out into the woods to find something and then coming back. That's kind of how I'd see potentially a longer campaign working, where the system is background to the wider enjoyment of the world. Maybe.
Yeah, I agree. It also gives them help on downtime, and like what to do with it. And I thought what was really interesting is like how, making sure that they have like one downtime endeavor every session if you play weekly, if you want to grant more, if you play less often, all that sort of thing, and how to do it if they're away from, say, a safe space. And I thought that was interesting. Again, just laid out in a way that was just simple and quick. And I know downtime was talked more about like what you actually do in the player's guide, but I thought like, how do you run it to make it fair? But judging it on, oh well, you've not finished your this current encounter, this current mission you're on, where you don't get to have a rest or the downtime, right? But then it talks about like, these downtime sessions, they could be in flashback. Which I thought was great. What a great way to put it, so that you're not going like, well, how do we justify that you managed to get this skill or do this thing? It's like, oh, you just have it as a flashback. I just thought that was such a, again, I know that's so silly, but I hadn't thought of it like that, and I thought that was a great way to put into it.
No, I think that's good. And as you said, like the adapting on the road thing is quite good. I like I think it's always useful, like if you find yourself in those situations and you can see there's no harm in saying you come across a bandit camp, which actually turns out to be friendly and it's a place to rest. It could always be these useful things. Or even in the middle of a dungeon, you come across a wayward traveller who's also been in the dungeon and has just and is actually trying to find their way out. And with them, they might have a healing potion. Do you know what I mean? Like there's reasons that you could just maybe just satiate your character's needs, we're all dying in here, and you're like, I can actually Deus Ex Machina, but not crazily, but enough to like lighten the tone,
give you a reprieve
from everything that's going on. Because I always remember my first D&D encounter as a returning adult to the game, where we just were like, well, we're halfway through the Sunless Citadel and we need to rest, so we're just gonna rest in one of these jail cells. That's cool, right?
What could possibly go wrong?
Because we got like 9 hit points each, and that's all gone now. There's that sense of like, and it's very awkward, and so maybe using these ideas is a good way of bringing that in. I just wanted to go back to the introducing new threats thing, which I liked, because I think they were just good little additions to Grim Portent, as just like maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sort of other conceptual things to take away that you can utilize in your game. So that's kind of what I like. And there are good ones for like any GM of like a greater power, that you might always find there's something behind the something, that you're fighting.
Yeah.
Or the enemy of my enemy is like always a great thing. Like, okay, well, the enemy of my enemy could be my friend. And don't forget that. You could always just think about who you're going against. Are you going against you might be going after, it mentions in here, like going after the Slaughter Stag, which is the Warherd, so they're like beastmen. But it says, well, on that end, you might team up with the Witch Hunters, even though you might have, a magical person in your like a witch or a hedge witch in your party who may not be the best, but the Witch Hunter's more keen on getting some beast people, who are doing chaotic things in the woods or something like that. So there's always those kind of things where we were fooled, and no coincidences, and no final victory. As always, like they're all big words that you can read into in more depth, but they're always quite the no coincidences just always make you think of like Sherlock, like everything is always meaningful and stuff like that. So you can, and allowing you to do those coincidental moments, because you're still playing a game. And it's like movies, it never happened in real life. Well, it's because this is the interesting story, those kind of things.
Yeah, I agree. Going back to other tools for the GM, and I said to you this before we started recording, I really love, again, not a new concept, I appreciate this, but the dark threads.
Yes.
And how it integrates it with the old world instantly. But like obviously talking about the wider idea of having this like, factions and how they're connected and who's a part of it, but having it visually, and I go, here's an example using the Talagaad stuff. And on page 52 and 53, it has this sort of double spread with not only this sort of like big sort of mind map of arrows pointing to each other, but they're color coded.
Oh, so good. It's
great.
So good.
I want something like that. I think like it's a very simplistic design, don't get me wrong, but I could imagine, having like if they were going to do this again, this is me going like, oh, merch opportunity, having like a cloth map of all the heraldry, like the way it's put on shields. And maybe you make your own. I can imagine any Etsy people out there. If you've got like a big sort of cloth map, and then you have like little patches that you could attach to it and move around. Anyway, that's my free idea to you guys. Because I just like the idea of visually being able to see it, like a relationship map that you have in Vampire the Masquerade, but giving it to your players, and then they can see like, wait, so you're connected to this person. We've just discovered there's a connection to this person, and maybe comparing notes for yourself as the GM, but also your players can also have the notes as well. So yeah, I just thought this was a really nice thing to do. Like again, visually it just looks great, and I've not seen it in a game before. And again, I don't know if this is unique to Warhammer, or I've heard of the concept of having like a web of ways. But
I think it's the first time I've seen it, and I love it so much, and wish to make one for lots of things in my next games. It's like, it's such a, as you said, it's a really clear, concise way of showing all these different things we just talked about earlier and how they interrelate. Like, I really like talking about like the Dominion of Dust, for example. You've got like the Barrow Seal, which is a skeleton army without a master. You've got the Ivory Circlet, which is a Larmian vampire blood coven. Seek to necromantic command the skeleton army. And then it's like, but the Dirge of the Hawk it's their former army who's just been awoken and pledged loyalty to the Dust Queen. And you're like, it's the Pepe, what's his name? It's great. It's fun. And the fact that you've got the Ivory Circlet and the Hexen Guild both want to necromantically command this skeletal army without a master. And so you're like, that's cool. And yeah, that Hexen Guild want to control a lot of people though. So, they've got their fingers in all the pies. But yeah.
But yeah, and again, you could just, if anything, you're like, I don't know where, if you're stuck for ideas about where the next open world, if you're doing a sandbox thing, could be, you could just be like, there, like, throw the dart at the board, as it were, and be like, oh, I've picked, the Bog at the Sly. Okay, and then go from there, like, what can you build around that? So I just think it's just a cool visual way of looking at it, and then seeing what connects to them instantly without you having to search the book or make your own, like encyclopedia, your own database that I've had to do with some games where you put the factions in together and stuff. Again, in this current bit of it, it gives like a quick information on either side of this big spread about, the main sort of factions, but it goes into much more detail in the allies and antagonists bits, and including obviously the stat box and stuff like that. So if you really wanted to focus on, say, the Talagaad, like the Grand Duchy, you go, okay, here's these people, and then you go and look in the sort of chapter 7, and then you could go into more detail there. So I just think it's, again, what's cool about it, and I've said it before, so it talks about, say, for example, the Grim Portents at the beginning, here they are, and then later on goes, oh, remember those Grim Portents? Here's how you run them. And here it's like, oh, here are the main threads of it, and then later on goes, hey, remember those main threads? Here, let's go into them in a lot more detail for you. So you're not suddenly overwhelmed with all the information right now you need to know. And I think, again, talking about that, what's for the players, what's for the GM, I think actually the organisation of the stuff in the GM's guide is good, manageable chunks. Whether or not that all this information should be in the player's guide or not is different, I think. But I just thought, as a read-through thing, I'm not going, right, like I said earlier, like, well, that's me done for today. I've only read 2 pages and I can't process anymore. Here I've gone, oh, yeah, this makes sense. And then come back to me, oh, yeah, I read this the other day. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think they're great. I'm all on board with the use of them as well as, like, I see it as well as, from what you said, just building on the fact of, like, as a GM, even when you're casting your eye on, maybe you use that Grim Portent that deals with Luden, what's his name, the Ludenhoffs, and that then links you to the uncle, which is the vampire, and it says that also they're sheltering, the Necrarch, Zekratar, which is conducting vile experiments, and that is the apprentice of Henrik von Mortis, who's an exiled necromancer for revenge, which then leads you onto the Sigmarite Witch Hunter, and then you just might be like, well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take 4 steps away from where we're right now, which is the Ludenhoffs, and I'm going to go to the Sheltered Flame, and I'm going to bring them in, who are a cult of Sigmar, and I'm just going to be like, just take them into this game somehow, and that could then lead me backwards to where I'm at.
Yeah.
And that's a so much more exciting journey for your characters that might have been like, oh, I've met this Ludenhoff. Oh, he's weird. He's got a weird uncle. What's he on about? Is it just him being a bit drunk? Whatever. Grim Portent, but we don't quite know. But he's probably, why is he burning people? And then it's just like, oh, suddenly the Shelter of Fame turns up, and we've been trying to get this Henrik von Mortis necromancer. When you get there, it turns out they're hiding at the Lindenhof's house, and you're like, oh, the connection, you know?
Ooh,
yeah, and I think
feels very cool and satisfying.
yeah, much more satisfying
thing.
than maybe the more direct route that you might take as, you know, just from what's put on the page.
And I know this is such a small thing, just moving on a little bit to, like, if you're creating your own Dark Threads sort of, like, mind map. I didn't realize they were called, like, like the sort of cluster areas, they called them knots and threads.
Yes.
I just think it's very in keeping
That's
with the
cool.
whole, like, I know it's so silly, but, like, it didn't have to be like, it could just be like nodules or anything like that.
Yeah.
But they clearly, again, that language around everything is like, hey, we're in the old world. It's the pins and the string on a conspiracy board, right? But it's the knot and where all the information is and stuff. So, and how do we fill in the gaps? And I think this is, I can imagine, what you would spend most of your time prepping if you're going to run a game of your own, rather than what session to session will be. The main admin, I can imagine, would be like looking back at your Dark Threads board and going like, okay, so they found out this. What else could be there? So that's where I think, and I'm sure it talks about it in more detail, but in my head it's like, okay, this bit's the most important bit for me, because I want to make sure that it's not something I just make up at the end and like, oh, well, it was this guy, and you're like, well, who is this guy? It's not connected to any of the threads. Whereas if you take the time to do even, and obviously the simpler the better. Don't get me wrong. If you get convoluted, it gets away from you. But like, I think that's just so much more satisfying. So yeah, that's what I'd say is just as a GM reading this, I'm like, yeah, if you want to make the focus on this Dark Threads thing as the big part of your
100%.
GM prep.
And I think what those two things together, the Grim Portents, Dark Threads, and a couple of other things like they've done just in the player's guide coming to mind, but just like they've done with character creation and things like that. What I've found with the old world is that it may still be Warhammer game, and we may all argue we've got Woofra, but what they've at least done with this is not only have they made a completely different system that offers you a different type of game, but they've offered things which are useful to any campaign that are particular and different, and maybe you haven't thought of before. And so I think that there's definitely worthiness. I think like if it feels like they felt like they needed to really they really need to make this a worthy addition to their library.
Agreed.
And they've done that really well as well.
And like I think, like, you know, again, I always compare back to when we looked a little bit at the player's guide for D&D, and I've looked at the GM's guide, the DM's guide, sorry. And what I find interesting is that my verdict at the end of those books were like, this would have been great for me 5, 6, 7 years ago when I first started playing D&D specifically. I'm now looking at this book and like looking at stuff like, hey, how do you provide information in forms of like gossip on the street, omens and dreams, and then it's like breaking down what the difference between clues, insights, and leads. Like, don't get me wrong, this I appreciate could be absolutely common sense if you were already running these kinds of games. I'm there going like, I never thought of it like that.
No,
okay.
I totally agree. And
I'm just there going like,
it's not been set out like this, which is kind of.
But you know what I mean? Like, I'm sure people, you know, who've always played these games have gone like, oh yeah, that's how it works. But I'm actually there going like, this feels so accessible to me.
Yeah.
And I'm surprised that I've not thought of it like that. And again, my own assumption of like, oh, Warhammer's just hitty, fight, stab. I'm like going like, it's talking about mysteries. It's talking about how do you get these information? I'm like, I need this in all games. So that's why I wanted to commend it on. I think it is a very good, streamlined GM's guide that would, as an introduction, and it just so happens to be Warhammer. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I just thought it was just such a unique thing. Whereas I felt like the Dungeon Master's Guide felt like this would have been great as an accessible thing to D&D 10 years ago for me.
Yeah, and actually,
but now I've played it so much, I don't need it.
No,
Whereas this,
100%.
I'm like, I do need this, you know.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think this is like D&D DM's guide. One point, like DM's guide is like how to DM 101, and this is how to DM 102. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's a kind of a little value to that, and you know, and the social engagement things is quite, you know, good, and talks about the social actions that are later on in the player's guide, which talks about like the mechanics of all that. But I think it's quite interesting with the examples that actually there aren't enough of, I would suggest, in this book. That's the point, because they are useful, but I guess there's less mechanics. But
yes,
particular
true.
for myself was the how to make it Warhammer.
I was just about to ask, was it that bit? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I think the thing again that we said, and I think it doesn't mention, is that Warhammer's funny, and it doesn't do that, and and even though it does do it in the story and the players and the characters it creates and the places it talks about, it has a humor to it. But the funny thing it doesn't say is it makes it aren't pretty. They also a chance to demonstrate unique flavor of Warhammer. It's dark tone, it's oppressive class struggles, and the overhanging spectre of war. You should always anchor your narration in what makes war strange and distinctive. The eerie green light of Morsalib, which is the weird moon. The fact there's two moons as well. A change in the wind's direction carries a malodorous scent of waste. The vagrant free company fighter wounded in battle. Trumpet cry heralds. But it doesn't say like. But also, it's ridiculous and stupid, and you should have a lot.
Where's the gallows humor, right? Because your players, as someone who does a lot of horror, your players will need the humor and they will bring it themselves. And I think maybe again, my suggestion for this would be like have those gallows humor or the sort of the funny comic relief with those NPCs or with the random encounters that they see, just to lighten the load. Because otherwise, unless the players are all like, we're going to do the grimness of this world.
That's the thing. I don't think this actually makes it Warhammer. This makes it. It is grim dark, but it's got goblin. So the game that we played, when the goblins turn up, it's the best time. We're all having a great time. They're stupid. Chris played an absolute blinder with them. He's got their mannerisms correct. They were being rude. They were being silly. They were knocking into each other. They were trying to stealth and were like tripping over. It was just like. The humour in it. But at the same time, they're completely decimating us in battle, But it's actually, we're all having fun. And, I totally agree. It should be eerie. It should be dark and sort of there's corruption. But it is 50% that and 50% people being
It's interesting, because I wonder then, because again, I know of this humor because I've played in the littlest bit of Warhammer, going I get this now, because I didn't, again, from the outside it doesn't seem to be something for me, and I wonder if they don't mention it because it's something that the players bring to it, or you know what I mean. It feels that sort of thing where it never seems to be there.
All my white dwarfs, and it is littered with stupid things. The fact that you have the red, it's called White Dwarf, and it got overtaken in 1999 or something like that one year by the Red Gobbo. The Red Gobbo is their version of Santa Claus, who's a goblin who dresses up in a Santa Claus hat and gives you stuff. Their adverts are done by even just the fact that they do their Christmas adverts with a guy called James Workshop, who is the fictional CEO of Games Workshop.
That's great.
Have you not seen it? I recommend them. He's just like, I am James Workshop. Oh, you've made a mistake? Well, that's your fault. Puts the phone, it's that kind of, and that is, it's that kind of humour that is Games Workshop and the Warhammer setting. It is fundamentally always linked with the Terry Pratchett and the sort of
it feels very Terry Pratchett or Douglas Adams-esque type thing.
But it is the mix of that with the grim dark,
it's so interesting.
Which I think is but it's. Now, I don't want to generalize it too much, but I think that,
of course,
but I think that there's a particular raft of people that have taken who see the grim darkness of it and take it very seriously, and particularly from 40k as well, where it is a much darker tone, and the lightheartedness of the 41st millennium has been slowly dissipated over the years to where it is now, which is a much more banal and dark thing, but still flocks of memories of that exist in and amongst it still. But I think it does portray itself much greater in that sort of but they still have orcs, and orcs still can paint their things red, and therefore when they red they go faster, and if they paint them purple they're invisible just because they paint them purple, because if you paint it red it does go literally faster in the game. It's just silly, and so it still has that in 40k, but Warhammer the old world or whatever, has in the Warhammer Fantasy Battle that was before it was definitely like this. But Sigmar, it's lost a bit of that. 40k has lost a bit of that.
Yeah. I'd be interested to see, like, yeah, because obviously this world has its own RPG system now, and it's fine in a sense. Like the system is okay, and but it encourages that sort of very loosey goosey, like anything on your character sheet is fair game for you to roll something with the narrative dice, I believe. And I think to myself, why don't you just use this system? Because the system itself, from when we talked about it on Player's Guide, it was enough crunch and it's fun and it gives you something. And I again, this goes back to how good we found the system and what you're talking about. It's like, I can imagine this being with a Terry Pratchett kind of game, or if you want to do Hitchhiker's Guide to Galaxy, using that sort of thing. So I was just thinking about that from what you were saying. So
no, seriously, if we want to go to Ankh-Morpork, you could do Ankh-Morpork. Yeah, that's the one. You could go.
You got it,
yes. The only thing I would say just before is like, it's a brutal system though, and I think that could do with adjustment. We'll leave it at that.
Fair enough.
So once you get beyond that, you get the Events of Talagaad section, which just very much gives you more stuff to build your campaigns on, and is very GM focused on like.
Yeah, and as I said, I love a good random table. Yeah. I think the entries in it are really fun. But I would leave it to your own discretion to look at.
It's an events table. It's a encounters table, but expanded to be much bigger than just the standard encounters table. I think we can. I think the other thing in this book that we can sort of move beyond going into, which is much later, is the NPCs, the monster manual. It's great. It's got lots of stuff in it, and there's loads of things to get you going in games, from beastmen to orcs and goblins to wyverns to just a watchman of the guard. But the thing that I think we want to focus on before we sign off is corruption. Because it's a very critical element of all of Warhammer, and is fundamental to it. And it speaks in a similar manner as it does in the Wolfrock, of the fact that the whispers of chaos, that they are always there, that come out from their stellar gateways that are at each of the polar ends in the chaos waste that sit at the polar ends of the old world, that spewing out from these portals is the taint of chaos, always seeking any and all in this land to be twisted and tainted to its desires and needs and wants, and it will infest and inflict anyone who don't even dare to encounter it, but even just stray from the path of goodness or of enlightenment, maybe, or even just end up in the wrong place at the wrong time, really.
That's it. It can affect anyone, and I think what's interesting is that you get a little bit of primer. Again, if you're like me, haven't read anything about it, it's a thing. Is it Weirdstone or Warpstone? Bad things. But and obviously it goes into these like paths of corruption, of like different ways you could be corrupted. But it does talk about like the path back. Like, what if you stare into the abyss and manage to survive and not be corrupted? And it talks about like, then you have to, for the rest of your character's career or life, to be like straight and narrow, like, because that once bitten, twice shy, all that sort of thing. But like that, if you go back, that could be it. And I would suggest, even if you are tempted again and you fail, that it's much worse to have that consequence. Because I think all of it is just really interesting. And again, as a core part of Warhammer, this idea of corruption is something that's really cool to play with and have with your players. Because I would say, with all these corruption paths, what it reminds me of, there's a game which I don't think you've played, but it's called Heart, which is by Rowan and Descartes. And what they do in terms of like how you get XP is that you select beats, they're called, and it's just essentially like almost like a role play moment. It'd be like, I want to discover a landmark and it's mine, or I want to do X, Y, Z. I want to take this, and it could be mechanical, it could be not. But if you select what they are and you tell your games master what it is, the game master goes, "Cool. Well, I know how to plan my next mission. They want to go to a new place, and this person wants to fight someone, or they want to do this." And when they get XP, and it just means that they can make out what their arc is. And you've got like minor beats, major beats, and then something called zenith beats. And the zenith beats are always how your character is defeated. It could be that, and often it is by death, but how is they are transformed to be part of this heart, this horrific, procedurally generated dungeon. And here, the same thing. You've got the vulnerable, tarnished, and damned, and it's different. Obviously, as you go up, the corruption becomes more and more, and then the damned is always like how your character ends up completely twisted out of what they were.
Yeah.
And you could be like, as a player, like, oh, I really wanted to explore corruption. I want to end up with this, and they can work backwards. I think that having that conversation with your GM, you should do that, and then they can plan around it.
100%. And The Heart is a great example of that, because I haven't played it, but I have read it, and I've been told a lot about it by my friend Chris, who used to do stuff on this channel about, like, he loves it, and the fact that it, and also from the Quiddin's Quest, talking about it, about how, like, it's this sort of, like, inevitable doom that you are ending towards that will be glorious and magnificent in its horrificness.
It's very zealous in places, maybe compared to the old world, but yes, I would use that as a comparison.
But I think these are great, and I do like them, and I think the it's covered quite a lot of different aspects of chaos as well. So you've got the Child of the Forest, which talks more about the bestial nature of because like the beastmen and the sort of mutated element, and the sort of like how you get armored hide and retractable claws, which are really cool. And then you get this sort of sense of like ever growing manifestations and the powers that they will create for you. The Blood plus Foe, which is definitely the sort of like Cornian style of like musculature and rage-fueled flights of aggressive violence. And then you've got Secrets of Sorcery, which is the sort of like the tempting twists of magic and ideas, which is all Zinchian. These are the different gods of it. And then Enduring the Endurable, the sort of like...
This was horrible.
Which is horrible, But and it is the sort of like the most sad as well, because it's also like your unfortunateness, or in some cases like you might have like an illness or something like that, but also just you're in such a horrific environment that your only escape is the taint of chaos to survive from it, and how that thing. And then the Dark Obsession, which is much more you could say that the Enduring Endurable is the sort of postulant, maybe, but it's not quite nurgly enough, because it's not so much that you're going to make everyone have disgusting things, which you could make it, but it doesn't quite do that. Like, I'm going to spread disease everywhere. The Dark Obsession is very the Silnesian sort of like temptations and those kind of things, basically.
And like I said, you've got these, I think, five different corrupting paths. Again, odd number, always good, but enough to be there going like, cool, here's what we can start with. But again, as a GM, maybe that's the thing I would say, is that you've now got this framework. It tells you about like how the stages of that vulnerable, tarnished, and then damned, and how you get to those stages. Okay, cool. Now over to you. How would you create a corruption path that's new to the game if you were going to do that, or something specific but to you and your player? Because you know what it is that you can get. You can copy some of these like bonuses from Tarnished and put them in, but then you'd be like, cool, and now it's more role play towards the end. A few extra bits and pieces. Like, what do you want? So I think it could have some really cool crafting things if you know that. A player really wants to go to corruption and everyone's okay with it on the table, getting what the ending is and then working backwards and then feeding into the story is just going to be so delicious, Yeah,
well, I mean, we did that, spoiler alert, in Mordheim in a sense, didn't we? And let someone take the path to corruption. And it was unintended in my idea of what we were going to do, but it happened just naturally along the way. And it was actually just like, I was like, well, here's an opportunity to offer you something at a moment of despair. And I think that the storytelling potential as a DM intrigues me, particularly, and actually particularly like for me, the Secrets of Sorcery is such an easy one I can find myself into, because it's quite iconic, it's quite an iconic and sort of well overdone maybe concept, but the idea of the mage who's always seeking the greater power and the temptation of that sort of greed and vanity is always a fun thing. But you just think like, but the fact that you could lead it to this really like extreme, immense burst of magical energy that could do something kind of earth-shattering as a like, this could be a halfway point in a long campaign of like, okay, well, the player might be up for this, and you're like, okay, but you're probably only going to get halfway, then you're going to do something that's going to then affect everything moving forward, and then we can bring you in on something else. Could be a really cool thing, or it's just like. It's always the idea that it says like maybe you could just utilize your thing to aid or actually destroy everything you're doing. Could be really cool. So yeah.
I think overall my sort of takeaway thing is that I think it is a really good book. And I think I think from our discussion of the player's guide and then looking at this, I feel confident enough to run it. And I think, like I said, I'm not sure overall if it's missing something, because it feels like there's like 50 pages that should be extra somewhere. I don't know where that would be. But yeah, I think, like, for me, the big standout chapter is obviously the contacts, and the grim portents and the corruption as a way of like, hey, take these and put them else. I think I'd like more on Talagaad, which I know is wild for me to say, is that I want more of a primer. I think that's the only thing I'd say. Yeah. And also yeah, go on.
No, I agree with that. I think the only thing as well is there doesn't seem to be a map.
Yeah. Like a quick, like even like just a pencil drawing or something.
Of Talagaad. This is something that I felt was really lacking from it. And unless I've missed it in the last book, but that was the one thing I was like, okay. But yeah, I agree. 50 pages of something. Like it does feel in areas a little bit, not maybe rushed isn't the right word, but like it feels just a bit lighter than it could be.
I mean, maybe we're just so used to having big, thick books, and we're like going like, this is weird, and so maybe it's just on us. But yeah, like I said, going back to it, my sort of final point is that I think the Game Master's Guide advice for a new system, but using an old IP or at least an IP that it's not used to me. I thought it was really good writing. Maybe that's the only thing I'd expect. I think the only thing is that it doesn't talk about how to roll the main game mechanic, and unless it's in one little box, it goes, all that information's in the player's guide.
Yeah, it says what is dice, doesn't it, or something like that.
Yeah, and I'm like, I get that. Would have been nice to have that at some point, maybe a little early. Because not saying that I didn't look at the player's guide before we started, but is that something where I was like, what was the main mechanic? I assume that these books come together, or at least you'd have to have the player's guide to use this. Whereas I think, so is it worth buying this book? I think yes, but
only
realistically, you need monsters, and I think you are better off with the player's guide as your first foremost, which I know is an obvious thing to say, but we always talk about like, oh, have you read the Dungeon Master's Guide? And I go, I have now, but like, do I need to do it? Should I have read it?
But the unfortunate truth is that you have to buy both of these if you want to play a proper game of this, and I think that's the uncomfortable thing I have as someone who's like telling people what to buy, is that they're not cheap. They're not, they're still 30. They're like 35 quid each, which means actually, unlike a lot of other games where you're going to get everything in a book for £35, or like, would I suggest that you might be better off if you wanted to be like, you're concerned about like the cost of it and you're looking for an alternative, I would suggest just get yourself a copy of Wooferup. And you can adjust the mechanics very basically from a D100 system to this D10 system if you spend a little bit of time. Or you could find yourself, or get yourself a copy of Wooferup, and you could adjust everything to work, with this. I think, but personally, I would suggest that's kind of from a financial point of view, I would say it's a big ask, or get yourself a copy of the Player's Handbook and try and make find some other way to get some monsters, or as a group, get them together, buy one each, that's,
Or if you can wait, if there is a starter set coming, go for that. But at the same time, some people are just like, they don't want starter sets, they want raring to go because they're such big fans. So yeah. But thanks, Hamilton. I don't know what I was expecting for this Game Master's Guide after we read the big book of the Player's Guide. But yeah, I feel I'm really glad I did. I feel like I got some stuff out of it. So.
No, definitely. There's a lot to it that was beneficial, and I think it was really good. I think it was in the majority. Well, that's everything for today. I must thank you, Fiona, for your time and your energy and your insight as ever. It's always.
Try my best, me.
It's really good, and it's always, we do this a lot. We do a lot of this back and forth, and we know how much value it has for us. But yeah, thank you again. And as ever, everyone can find you on the internet.
Just type in my name, FKTH. It'll turn up, or RP Geeks, or What Am I Rolling, or even our DM's book club as well. So wherever you listen to podcasts, so look at that cool logo I made years and years ago.
It's a very good logo. It's very good.
I think I did all right on it.
I think you did pretty good. You put all of us out of a job, Fiona, but there you go. With that,
I don't think so, but I can tell you which font it is.
Well, I think we could use our own outro for this, just to give them a little insight in the great and wondrous world of the DM's Book Club. So there's nothing more to say then. We'll see you
on the flip side.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
All right.